You're listening to the Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast. Today's episode is about 9 of the simplest boundaries to set with any toxic person. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast is your sanctuary for navigating the sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, I'm Miriam Susan. Welcome to today's episode, all about some simple boundaries that you can set with any toxic person, but especially toxic family members. Today's scripture reference is from Proverbs, verse 23, and it is from the New Revised Standard Version Catholic edition of the Bible. And it says, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life." We all know that family relationships could be, and I think they are, the most challenging relationships when it comes to having boundaries. Now, these boundaries, in case you have missed previous episodes, boundaries are not for punishment. They are not to get revenge on somebody that you just don't like. Boundaries are designed to show people where you end and where they begin. And boundaries are really important if you struggle with confrontation. These boundaries are going to include some that you might want to announce, as in these are external boundaries. These are boundaries that you tell other people so that they are aware of them. And they're going to include quite a few internal boundaries, which are boundaries that you just kind of keep within your immediate family, just between you, your husband, and any children who might be old enough to help you implement or understand these boundaries. And I want to re-emphasize that boundaries are not walls. They're not a way to punish others, to force other people to do what you want. No, they are like the property line around your house, and it shows where you begin and others end. So, with all that being said, let's jump into the first boundary. And this is an external boundary, meaning that this is something that you would tell other people. This is not one that you would necessarily keep within your family, but it could be. And that is no calls or texts after a certain time. Now, the challenge with this is that oftentimes when we have toxic family members, they feel like they can contact you whenever they want. And actually, you know what? They can. They can contact you unless you've asked them not to. They can try to reach out and call you and text you at any time they want. I heard something a while ago and it really stuck with me, and that is the telephone is for the convenience of the person that owns it. It is not for the convenience of everybody else who's trying to call in. It is for our convenience that we have phones. So keep that in mind. When you are getting a whole bunch of calls or a whole bunch of texts from people that you don't really want to have contact with, it is up to you to decide whether you answer that call, let it go to voicemail, or respond to that text. A simple thing that you can say to family members if they get upset with you because you're not immediately responding to a phone call or a text after a certain hour of the day is you can say, well, we keep our phones on silent after 8 o'clock so that we can get the kids ready for bed and so we can have good sleep. End of story. And you don't even have to say all of that. You can just say, oh, we keep our phones on silent after 8 and leave it at that. And if somebody says, well, but what if there's a family emergency? Okay, well, if there's a family emergency, then we'll deal with that then. Because usually when people throw that out, but what if it's a family emergency? Then, at least what we have experienced and I have witnessed with the interactions between my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law is that all of a sudden, there's all kinds of family emergencies, even when they're not. Be careful when you say these boundaries, especially ones that you announce to others. Because as soon as you give out excuses, they will try to dismantle them. They will try to break down that excuse to find a loophole so that they can make it so that the boundary doesn't really apply to them. But a simple boundary, like no calls after 8 p.m., no texts, we're not going to respond to them until the next morning, it really frames it as a personal choice, not a rejection of them. And frankly, I don't know about you, but so many of us in our house get unwanted texts and unwanted phone calls from random people, from scammers pretending they're FedEx and we missed a package. Or, I got a text the other day that just said, hello. And I'm like, what is this? Like, why is somebody texting me just hello? This doesn't make any sense. That's a perfect reason why you would want to put your phone on Do Not Disturb. So when you do this, you can let your family know, okay, we turn off Do Not Disturb at 9 a.m. and we turn it on at 8 p.m. So between the hours of 9 a.m. and 8 p.m., you're free to contact us and we will check our phone and get back to you as soon as we can. And that's it. Because having a time of rest from outside inputs, it's biblical. Because think about what God did on the seventh day. He rested. He didn't keep working. He didn't keep doing things. He didn't keep creating the world. He rested on the seventh day. So us having a time to allow ourselves a level of rest that doesn't include contact on our telephone, that's perfectly fine. You are not being ugly. You're not being mean. You're just saying, I need this time to rest. And I always like to think about 100 years ago, there was not this intrusion into our lives like we have now. If somebody lived hours away and they wanted to contact you, they had to send a telegram, or maybe they had to send a letter, or maybe they had to hop on a horse and drive and ride the horse to wherever you were to give you that information. So this level of connection is unprecedented in human history. So just because we have this level of connection doesn't mean we need to allow it to have this much control in our lives. And I want to say, all of these boundaries are pretty simple. And I wanted to create this list because I know that for so many of you who listen to this podcast, just saying no is really, really hard. And so I wanted to find some ways that you can say no to certain things without it actually being the word no, without it feeling super confrontational. Okay, so that's what the theme is with all of these boundaries that I'm going to be sharing in this episode, is they are ones that should be pretty easy to do. I mean, it's pretty easy for you to hear of a friend who maybe they work and they say, I'm putting my email on vacation mode while I'm gone. We're traveling. I'm going to have my email on vacation mode and I'll get back to you when we get back. Or you've gotten an email response from somebody at maybe a doctor's office and they're out of the office and it's like, oh, okay, well, that's completely normal, right? But somehow when it comes to our family, we feel like our family gets different rules. They get exceptions. And we don't have to allow those things to happen. We don't have to allow those exceptions. But we do because we feel guilty, but we don't have to. That's what these boundaries are. It's an opportunity for you to start exercising that boundary muscle that you have in simple ways so that other boundaries, as you need to put them in place, are easier to do. Now, the next one that I will admit, this is probably the hardest one on the list, and that is no dropping by unannounced. And we dealt with this a lot when we lived super close to my in-laws. And this is where our extended family, specifically my in-laws, felt like they just have an open door policy to our house. They could just come over whenever they wanted, and I didn't like it. And I did not stand up for myself. So I understand how hard this one is. So this is probably the hardest one on the list. So I'm putting it out here early so you can just kind of mull it over. But a simple thing that you can say when people come by saying, we'd love to see you, but we need a quick text beforehand so that, number one, make sure that we're home, and number two, that we're ready for visitors. And this simple boundary shows that you want to see them, but you just need some notice. Now, this is the hard part. You have to enforce this boundary. If you don't want your extended family coming over anytime they please without letting you know, when they come over, you have to enforce the boundary if they haven't given you notice. And you don't answer the door if you're not prepared for visitors. Now, is that rude? No, it's not rude, because what is rude is people coming over after you've asked them to let you know and having them come over without telling you. That is what is rude. If you tell somebody, can you just send me a text before you head over just to make sure that, we're ready and we can have you come over for a visit, and then they show up, that is rude. We have to realize that the rudeness comes in not listening and not honoring a simple boundary. It is not hard in today's day and age to pick up your phone and send a quick text to somebody before you go over to their house. Period. It's not. And so if you have your family members coming over and they didn't let you know, and you had asked them to let you know, or even if you haven't told them that you want them to text you or call you and let you know ahead of time, if they show up and it's not a good time, you don't have to let them in. You might answer the door if it's super uncomfortable for you to just go about your business knowing that your in-laws are standing outside the front door, or maybe they're ringing the doorbell incessantly. Maybe they are talking into your Ring or your security camera. Maybe they're knocking on the door, just going nuts. Maybe you open a window and say, you know what, now really is not a good time. We need you to come back later. That's not rude. That's being real. That's being truthful. That's being honest. And it's letting them know, hey, this is our home. You can't just come over whenever you want to. That's what a boundary is. And again, I feel like I have to repeat this over and over again because I know how it feels to be thinking about this and think, but that's rude. They're going to think I'm being rude. They're going to think I'm being ugly. Yeah, but they are the ones being rude and ugly by not honoring your request for just a little bit of notice before they come over to your house. Remember, this is your house. This is your property. Even if you don't own it, if you rent it, it's still yours. You signed the lease on it. They're not on the lease. And you know what? Okay, so now I'm thinking, okay, but Miriam, we live on my in-laws' property, or we rent a house from them. Even still, that's your home. That's your private space. Just because you're renting a place from your in-laws, maybe even you live in the same house as they do, and you have your own room. They can't just come in whenever they want. And if they start saying that they can, then it is time to move out. It is time to find whatever way you can to get out of that house, because that is just an extreme, disregard of you and your family as an autonomous, independent unit. Now, I went on a whole lot longer on this boundary than I intended, but we need to remember that even Jesus withdrew from the crowds. He withdrew from other people to prepare for whatever he was about to do in his ministry. We are allowed to have some time and space for ourselves without the intrusion of other people. It's not being rude, because they are the ones being rude, thinking that they can just do whatever they want with your time and your place. All right. Our next boundary is the first of our internal boundaries. Most of these are going to be internal boundaries. And this one is no time alone with the kids. And this is highly important. If you feel uneasy with the behaviors that you've seen from your in-laws, you can decide that they don't have time alone with the kids. And this is not one that I would ever announce. This is just one that you implement. So what does this look like? You're always there when your in-laws are around your kids. You don't leave your children alone with those family members. You use phrases around the situation like, well, let me come with you. Or my kids, I want them to stay here. Those kinds of things. And it is our duty as Catholic mothers to protect the most vulnerable. And the most vulnerable are our children. That is our Christian duty. That is part of our vocation as wives and mothers, is to protect our young children. Now again, don't announce this one. Don't even tell your children, especially if they're younger. Don't tell them that they're not going to have time alone with grandma. You can answer your children's request. Well, how come I can't go over to grandma's house to spend the night? Well, we like to do things together as a family. Period. That's it. Let it be uncomfortable, hanging in the air if your in-laws ask these kinds of questions. Well, why can't so-and-so spend the night at our house? Well, we like to do things together as a family. And just let it hang there. And that's it. That's all you have to say. All right, the next boundary is no immediate responses to texts. Now, again, this kind of goes back to the whole thing about, the time frame on your phone calls. But let's say you do have this boundary. Hey, we don't have our phones on after 8 p.m. So then your toxic in-laws decide to take advantage of the time that you do have your phone on. But you don't have to respond immediately. And toxic people, now we're not doing this to annoy them. We're not doing this to antagonize them or provoke them. This is just your decision that you're not going to respond immediately to text, because a lot of times toxic people get more and more, their intensity increases the longer you go between responses to their texts. I saw phone logs from my sister-in-law's phone from her mom just texting one after the other over and over and over again. And I saw it when my mother-in-law was reaching out to an old neighbor. It was one after another, after another, after another. And it was like if she didn't respond fast enough, my mother-in-law would write even more to elicit a response. And so if your family, an extended family, and your in-laws expect instant replies, what you can control, because obviously you cannot control how often they text you, is your response time. And I know that on iPhones, you can go in and you can mute a conversation. So your sister-in-law might text you 100 times in an hour, but if you have them mute the conversation or hide response, I can't remember exactly what it is on the iPhone, but there's a setting in there where you can still receive the messages without blocking them, but you don't get a ding. You don't get a notification every single time it comes in. That's what you can control. And then you get to respond when it's convenient for you. And here's a really important thing. Do not apologize for delayed responses to non-urgent messages. You don't have to say you're sorry, especially if you're not sorry. Don't apologize when you're not really sorry. This will begin to train your family that something urgent, maybe it requires a phone call, not a text. And then you can decide to let it go to voicemail. And then you can decide if this is something urgent enough for you to respond to. So this will help, hopefully, to create some realistic expectations between you and this extended family member that decides that your phone is just free access to you anytime they please. Hopefully, they can begin to learn. And if they don't, if you see a pattern of them disregarding it and getting annoyed and angry, then you can make the decision to put up a firmer boundary of, I'm just going to block this person because they're not respecting me and my requests. So now they don't get access to me. Because we need to sometimes remember that toxic people as a whole tend to be really immature children emotionally. And so if we think about a hangry toddler, we don't give in. If you continually give in to a hangry toddler, you're going to have a toddler that grows up and thinks that everything that they need or want, if they don't get it, then they have to throw a temper tantrum. And that's what a lot of our toxic family members are like. They act like this hangry toddler who needs a nap, who needs a snack, and needs boundaries, but they're in an adult body. And so we have to remember that emotionally, a lot of toxic people are just little children, and we don't give little children who are acting disrespectfully, who are acting disobediently, whatever they want. And so the same goes with our toxic family members. Now, another really, I think this one is a simple boundary, especially if your children are little and you haven't already started allowing this, is no sleepovers, period. Now, we never did sleepovers at friends' houses, period. I had some really bad experiences as a child, and I did not want to expose my children to that same possibility. We just had the no sleepover rule until we moved close to my in-laws. And then all of a sudden, it was okay that the children could spend the night at their house. And while we don't know of anything super traumatic that happened, there were little things that bothered our children, especially our girls, because our boys never were old enough to go spend the night with their grandparents when we lived nearby. We only had one son when we lived nearby. He was born while we lived close by, so he was too little. But our girls would have things that happened at their grandparents' house that made them uncomfortable, or they would get a headache, most likely from the stress of being around their grandma, even though they didn't know the backstory of what was going on between my in-laws and me, or my in-laws and my husband. Our children still felt it, and so they would end up with migraines while they were at her house. And when things started to escalate with my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law, that's a whole nother story, because my sister-in-law came to live with us and things just got crazy. We decided no more sleepovers, and we did not announce it to my in-laws. Unfortunately, my youngest daughter, she was about 4 at the time, we had told the girls, and she overheard, that they were not going to be spending the night at their grandma and grandpa's house. And she, in her little mind, toddlers, you just never know what they're going to say. And she told her grandma that she was not going to be allowed to go over to her house at all anymore. Not just to spend the night, but she said not at all. And you can just imagine how that went over. It was a crazy, crazy story, but I don't want to go into that because it's too long of a story to share right now. But you don't have to announce this. And be careful saying it to your children because they might repeat something to your in-laws that's not entirely correct. So if you get questioned about it, just say, well, that doesn't work for us anymore. And no explanation is needed. You don't elaborate. You don't justify. You don't do anything like that. What you can do if you still want to have contact with your in-laws and are okay with going over to their house together as a family is you can offer an alternative like day visits. No, they're not going to spend the night because we're just not doing that anymore, but we can come see you on Thursday afternoon. And then you have to stay consistent. You can't make exceptions. And we need to remember that we are primarily responsible for our children's safety. And if you have any feelings of, I just don't know about this, then that's on you to act on that and keep your children home. Now, if your husband doesn't feel the same way that you do, I hope that you can work it out. I hope that you and your husband can get to an agreement point to where, he feels like he's together with you on this. And then a lot of people say, but my in-laws, they're not ugly to my children. They're only ugly to me. If somebody's ugly to you, that is ugly to your children. If somebody is mean and hurtful to you, that hurts your children. And you don't know what's going on if you're not there. You don't know what your in-laws are saying to your children about you, putting you in a negative light because you're not there. And that was the big reason why we stopped allowing our children to spend the night at my in-laws' house, is because my mother-in-law was saying ugly things about me, and we had no control over whether she was trying to plant those seeds in our children when we were not there to witness it. The next boundary is not sharing personal or financial information with your in-laws. Now, many of our in-laws feel like they are entitled to know our business. They're entitled to know our finances. Maybe your spouse, maybe you work with your in-laws. But that doesn't mean that you have to share your personal and financial information. So the strategy with this boundary is, number one, again, you don't announce it, but you just go and put your in-laws on an information diet. And that means you share less with them, not more. So you just keep conversations at a surface level. You redirect any personal questions. If they're asking about, how are your finances? I know you guys have been struggling. I know so-and-so has been out of a job. How are you doing? We're doing well. Thanks for asking. Or you could say, things are a little rough, but we're getting by. Thanks for asking. And then leave it like that. And you cannot fall into the trap of feeling obligated to explain what your choices are. So let's say your vehicle is just shot and a family at your church finds out about it and they bless you with a really nice used car for a really great price and one that you can afford. But your in-laws see this car and they're kind of putting two and two together. They know your husband's been out of work for a while. They know you've been struggling, and here you are in a new car. And they start asking questions. Well, you don't have to explain to them the whole situation. You can just say, God is so good. He presented this opportunity that we could take advantage of, and so we did. And then you leave it at that. And if they keep hounding you, you can just say, I'm not comfortable sharing all that information, but we're just grateful to God that He provided this opportunity. There are ways that you can answer these questions. I know it takes practice. I know it takes time to not fall into these traps, because I very easily fell into these traps because I felt like I had to be honest by telling them exactly the answer that they wanted. But you can be honest and truthful without giving them the information they want. And that was really life-changing for me, that I could answer a question that my in-laws were posing to me, specifically my mother-in-law, and I didn't have to answer it in the way that she wanted me to answer it. I could answer it in a truthful way without giving her the information that she was trying to trick me into giving. Now, our seventh boundary is one that ties into the last one about not sharing personal or financial information. And this one is not lending money to family members. I know this is hard for many of us, especially those of us who have been blessed financially, and maybe your family is like ours, and we struggled for many, many years, and now we are at a point where we do have some money that we can share and bless others with. But financial dependence is a very real thing with toxic people. If you have a family member who is careless with their finances, it is not wise to give them money in order to, keep them afloat so that they will need more money again. There's this distinction that we have to make sometimes is this a financial emergency, or is this going to be like a regular request? And you can very easily say, well, maybe not easy, but it is simple to say, we can't help with that right now. And sometimes that actually is the most loving thing to do for family members who struggle with financial responsibility, is to let them receive the consequences of their poor choices. One of the very strong components of parenting that I've heard before is about natural consequences. Well, the natural consequence to being financially irresponsible is dealing with financial issues. So you don't have to explain your financial situation to a family member. Obviously, if you are more well off, they're going to see it, but you don't have to explain it to them. And you don't have to suggest alternatives. You don't have to suggest different solutions. But if you do feel like you want to help, you need to consider any money you give as a gift. Do not have any expectations of getting it back. And I would, highly encourage you to really pray about any money that you give to family, because I've seen it over and over again where somebody gives to a family member to help out, and the next thing they know, a month later, they're back with their hands open again, looking for more. And that's not really helping if they have to keep coming back over and over again. All right. Boundary number 8 is about not getting pulled into family drama and gossip. Toxic family members love chaos. They love drama, and they want to get you involved in conflicts. And so if you are in a social situation and your in-laws start gossiping about somebody, you can say something very simple like, that really sounds tough for them, and not feed into it. But even better yet, just exit the conversation. Exit. Whether you have to get up and leave or hang up the phone call or whatever you need to do, for me, it's better to just find an exit and get out. When these conversations are going on, don't ask follow-up questions. Don't offer advice unless somebody specifically asks you for it. Try to change the subject very quickly. And then don't be the go-between different family members by sharing information. Don't do that. I'm not comfortable sharing that. I think maybe it'd be better if you told them yourself. There's always ways to get out of these situations. And by keeping yourself neutral, it keeps you out of being in these toxic, triangulated relationships. And then our last boundary that I want to talk about is, again, an internal boundary, not one you announce, but you can announce it in a certain way, but just not directly. And that is no automatic yes to requests by extended family. Because toxic people try to pressure you into immediately agreeing to a certain demand, agreeing to a certain invitation, agreeing to whatever. And what we can say is, let me think about that and get back with you. Or let me check with my husband and we'll get back to you. This allows you time to think, and you want to always buy yourself some time to think. And then go check with your spouse. Go check with your kids before you make any kind of commitment. Check with your own calendar. Think about whether you want to do it or not. And then consider your own schedule and energy. Are you going to have the energy to go spend a weekend with your in-laws after your kids just had a crazy busy week of performances? You can decide not to participate. After you take this time, you say, let me get back to you. Let me check. Give yourself the permission to say no if you don't want to do it. And maybe if it's really, really hard for you to say no, maybe say no to things that you wouldn't normally say no to begin with. Maybe it's something small. Maybe it's just, around Easter time and your toxic in-laws are hosting an Easter egg hunt on Sunday, but y'all usually go to the Easter vigil at night. And so, Sunday afternoon, you're going to be tired, but you do it for the kids. But maybe this time you just don't. You say, we've enjoyed doing it in the years past, but this year we're going to opt out. We're just going to spend time together with our little family. Even if your family's not little, you can still say that. And just say no. Because this is one of those muscles. Again, by saying no, the more you say it, the easier it gets. So give yourself permission to say no after you think about what these boundaries are that are trying to be crossed, that, your family wants you to say yes to. Give yourself permission to say no after you stop and think about it and check in with your husband. Now, a lot of times our families will respond and they'll say, but we're family. And you can say, yeah. And because I love our family, I want to make sure that we show up in the best way that we can. Or I want to make sure that it works for all of us, not just the extended family. And expect guilt trips and manipulations, but remember that whatever they feel, whatever their emotions are about your boundaries, that's not your responsibility. You just get the opportunity to stay calm and repeat your boundary, if you're announcing it. If not, then you just repeat whatever phrase you want to say. Yeah, that doesn't work for us. Maybe next time. And if your in-laws throw back things like, well, you've changed. Well, you can say, yeah, I understand. I'm learning to take better care of myself so that I can be more present for my immediate family that I love. So we have to expect that there's going to be pushbacks, expect that these boundaries are going to be tested, but that's really where the hard part is. It's not in having the boundary, it's enforcing it and remaining consistent. So the key is to not make exceptions early on. It's a whole lot easier to be hard-lined and firm in a boundary initially, and then over time, if you see change, back off a little bit. But consistency really is the key to these boundaries. So I know this is probably a bit of an uncomfortable podcast if you are a people pleaser. If you have gotten into a habit of allowing your boundaries to be crossed and allowing your in-laws to dictate more of your life than is appropriate. But I really like this scripture that I chose for this episode: keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. If we don't keep our hearts, if we aren't true to who we are, to who God has created us to be, as wives, as mothers, as individuals in Christ, then whatever flows out from that exhausted state, that is what we give to others. And I want to encourage you that as a wife and mother, our vocation is to be wives and mothers, not to be daughters-in-law, not to be sisters-in-law, not to be granddaughters-in-law. Our vocation is to be wives and mothers. And if we are spending so much energy on trying to keep people outside that circle happy, then we are taking that energy away from those that God has called us to love and to cherish and to protect. So with that being said, God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad, or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional-client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.